Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session 2 for SMS, audits and inspections. Of course, I'm Anthony Noreko. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us. Before I introduce Robert and Ed and turn it over to them to run the presentation, I want to just advise you of two things. The first, the balance of the year, we've got some chapter meetings that are coming up. So in Atlantic Canada, November 20th, and then in the West, the first week of December. I'm going to post those dates in the meeting chat. Speaking of meeting chat, if you have any questions, feel free. I'll be monitoring the chat today. So if you've got any questions as Ed goes through his presentation, write them in and I'll be able to either take a moment or Ed will be able to take a moment during that presentation to seek your questions out, all in an effort to make sure that we get your questions answered. The third is a bit of a sponsor's message, but the sponsored in this case is the CBAA, and I really want to introduce here this Aviation Association Medical. So whether you are looking from a preventative standpoint, we've got an exciting program with TELUS Health for us aviation professionals on the go. If you're looking to solve and get ahead of whether it's the Canadian healthcare system as license holders with various medical requirements, it's going to be a tool that allows you to get the care that you need should it come up. Hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, you can get ahead of the concerns that you have. And if anything does come up, it'll be a quicker way to, let's say, to get you back to healthy and in TC's eyes, back to operating in the aircraft. So with that, what I want to do is turn it over to Robert or Bob Sinsens. Bob, over to you to introduce and take us through the balance of the day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Ed. So yes, Bob Sinsen here. So welcome everyone to this session 2. Just wanted to mention that session 1 may or may not have been attended by some of you. So following the session, as you may have noted, the session is being recorded. Anthony, from his end and in the office, will arrange for both sessions to be on through the weekly bulletin posted. And so anybody that may not have seen session 1, which was on SMS planning and organization, can go back and go from there and look at it up again or share within your organizations. So today's session, which will be run by Ed Ratzlaff, which I'll bring on in a second, is essentially, as Anthony mentioned, to cover audits, TC and self-audits and the importance thereof. A point is that last 2 months ago, we posted a short survey asking folks that if they had been audited of late, what kind of results did they see, or how did it go with TC and all that. So the survey was reposted today in case you missed it, on the weekly bulletin. If you haven't filled it, we would really appreciate the information. It just makes, as Ed goes through, he'll be speaking to experiences and all of that, and that will help us build a better database of information, and in the end serves the membership. So I think with that, I'll just stop and pass it over to Ed Ratzlaff. As you know, he's a private consultant, but is also on retainer with the association and provides us a very efficient and knowledge-based information about SMS and other board-related matters for members who wish to be in the doing business aviation. So Ed, over to you, and I'll stand by here for any questions that might come up also.
Thank you for the opportunity, Anthony and Bob, to provide this brief overview. And in the first session, which Bob already alluded to on May 2nd, earlier this year, we talked about the SMS, and in particular about the annual SMS review. And as we noted back then in that presentation, the quality assurance program is a subcomponent of the overall SMS regulation for a private operator. The QA program is, of course, more than just audits, but in this session, we will focus specifically on the audits. I'm planning to get through this slide deck in about 30 minutes, and we have a fair bit of material to go through, but I believe Anthony has budgeted for an hour, and this gives us time during the question and response time to circle back to anything that is of particular interest to any one of you. So without any further ado, let's get right into it and see if my presentation switches. If you can just confirm that it moved on to the agenda.
You bet.
You're good.
Perfect. So quick look at the agenda, nothing terribly exciting there, just what to expect in a TC audit, internal audits. We'll talk about the difference between quality control, quality assurance, auditor versus management responsibility, some audit trends that are, as Bob already noted, in part based on that survey, and an NPA and the QR. So this is a quote from Advisory Circular SUR 004, and I'll read it for us. TCCA, that's Transport Canada Civil Aviation, or TC for short, oversees the safety of the civil aviation system within Canada through monitoring the compliance to regulatory requirements. It is necessary that enterprises establish systems to comply with their regulatory requirements, and TCCA shall, through its surveillance program, verify that the systems enterprises have in place are adequate to ensure effective ongoing compliance to their regulatory requirements. So what does that mean? Let's take a closer look. So this part of the quote relates specifically to the operator, that it is necessary that enterprises, that means operators, establish systems that are adequate to ensure effective ongoing compliance. In other words, TC expects that operators do what it takes to be compliant regardless of whether TC audits them or not. And it'll become apparent in a little while why I say that. Put differently, TC expects companies to operate with integrity. Integrity has sometimes been defined as doing the right thing when nobody is looking or might not even ever know about it. This part now relates to what Transport Canada, or TC, will be doing. TCCA shall verify that the systems enterprises, again, the operators, are adequate to ensure effective ongoing compliance. TC's job, in plain English, is to conduct surveillance activities to the degree necessary to confirm that operators can reasonably be expected to be and remain compliant on an ongoing basis. That's the job of the systems. Operators are expected, this is just the whole quote again with the highlighting everything in it, operators are expected to comply with all regulatory requirements whether TC conducts inspections or not. The goal of audits or inspections is to confirm or validate that operators have the systems in place to be and remain compliant and, more importantly, safe. That's what they always say when they introduce the flight attendant. A good auditor, whoever it is, whether it's TC, myself, or whoever, should always strive to demonstrate that the compliance is being achieved or not, if that's the case. Audits should never be a trophy hunt where the goal is to get the biggest buck or catch the greatest number of walleye, for those of you who like the fishing and hunting. That's not what audits are about. In the next few slides, we will discuss what you as the operator can expect in a TC audit. So when Transport Canada comes knocking and sends you that email or gives you the call that your company has come up in the scheduling. So first, let's look at the types of audits TC has in their toolbox. A system-level inspection is designed to obtain a degree of confidence that its regulated enterprises, so that's you, the operators, are capable of maintaining compliance to regulatory requirements on an ongoing basis. So these types of inspections, the system-level inspections, typically cover the entire operation and generally try to establish that functioning systems are in place for all functional areas. They are not supposed to go into too much detail in any individual area. So next up are the process level inspections, and these are more focused than system level inspections, so they're more narrow. It concentrates on a single process at a time of an enterprise, so that could be technical dispatch, could be maintenance, training records, what have you, to determine that the process itself is achieving its purpose and complying with regulations. Process level inspections typically do not look at every area of operations. Rather, they look in detail at one or more specific areas of an operation. In most cases, they'll have two, maybe three. I've seen some that have more, and the odd time one that is just one area. The final type is what they call a reactionary inspection. It's really any one of the other two. But it simply means that these inspections will be in response to or as a reaction to some serious event, like an accident, for example. In this situation, the audit or inspection will be adapted as needed for the particular situation, and typically it will include drilling down into specific areas that might be suspected of having contributed to the accident. But they pretty much pull whatever levers they need to do the inspection that is warranted under the circumstances. There is no formula really for those. Now we are going to take a quick look at what an operator can do to be prepared for a TC audit, what you can do to be well prepared for the audit. So you have a good night's rest before TC shows up, so you don't have to worry about it. All your documents should be current and up to date. First and foremost, this is the operations manual, but could also include other documents such as MEL, SOP, AFM, MSA, whatever documents are applicable to your organization to show compliance. An OM, that's the operations manual, that makes it easy for Transport Canada to understand how you run your flight department should reduce the likelihood of getting a system level audit. So what we're saying here is what the assumption here is that you have already submitted beforehand, well before they plan the audit, your operations manual. If the operations manual is well laid out, addresses all the area, makes sense, is suitable for the scope and size of your operation, you're much less likely to get a system level inspection where Transport Canada looks at everything. They will just come in and do a much more focused inspection, which is typically called the process inspection. Additional processes. So with your operation, with your OM, your operations manual, you might have additional documents, specific instructions, whatever, that can be attached to your OM. What we do is typically important information will be attached as an appendix, so it can be managed separately. If you have all that stuff, that will make your audit go much easier. You will want to be well organized. In my experience, operators who are tidy and well organized consistently have better audit outcomes. Operators who are disorganized or without a system for document storage and retrieval typically have more audit findings. And that's simply a function of if you don't know where everything is, you wouldn't even know if you're missing something. And finally, the ability to easily produce compliance report is extremely helpful. Not just during an audit, a good internal report generating system will also make running the operation easier and less error prone. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in the next few slides. So on this slide, we will look at the kinds of documents that typically benefit the most from good organization and easy reporting. Just as an aside here, the typical small private operator with around 200-ish, give or take, hours per year, that seems to be a good average for a one-plane operation. They don't have that much documents to begin with. So a lot of this is relative to size and scale of the documentation, right? So operational flight data sheets, your training records, recency records, and here we're referring specifically to records for takeoff and landing recency, particularly night, where that comes into play, and of course the instrument recency requirements and various maintenance-related documents like lists of calibrated tools, do lists, who knows, whatever else you need there. So some areas that I have seen to be a challenge for operator, and as a result, those where the most findings are typically found by TC and also when I audit, are these ones here. Again, very similar list. Training records, the maintenance records, recency records. With regard to these last two, the maintenance records and the recency records, the issue typically is that software programs are usually quite complex and typically based on US regulations, because that's the biggest market, so everything is geared for that and often comes from there. Operator personnel often find it difficult to generate the types of reports required to demonstrate compliance with Canadian requirements. The issue is not that the data is not there. The issue is that in some cases it is impossible to extract the data in a way that demonstrates compliance. And then this leads to a situation where it is not possible to clearly demonstrate compliance, but it's also difficult or impossible to prove non-compliance, because whenever you actually try and look for a detail, eventually you find all the information there. It just makes everything more complicated and harder to find on account of them being all over the map or based on other regulations, and you need to recalibrate things. And the electronic flight data sheets are one of the last records to move to electronic records. So in other words, that is an area where we still see a lot of paper files in filing cabinets. And my experience has been that moving these to electronic OFDS storage actually makes the audit take longer, believe it or not. Traditional paper filing systems are sometimes more efficient than fancy new electronic systems. And that, again, it's simply, we have certain, call it KPIs, performance indicators, or key elements that you're looking at. And if you've used paper filing cabinets for the past 100 years, then you've got it figured out. Everybody knows how it works, and there's a certain system in it. And the new electronic systems just aren't as efficient sometimes. And it can be as simple as, oh, I can't send you the data because your email server doesn't accommodate this file size or whatever. Keep in mind, anything beyond what is required is probably too much. Unless, of course, you have a good system to separate the necessary from the optional, and in which case, keep whatever you like. Now we're going to look at the internal audits, including how they are different from a TC audit, or perhaps not that much. Let's start with some basic regulatory requirements. Your first audit must be completed within 12 months from when you first obtained your port. So the day you get your port, the day that's on your port, that's when the clock starts ticking. 12 months later, you have to have an audit. After that, the baseline requirement is for one audit every 12 months after the last audit was done. Now, audits can be extended. The CARs have provisions that allow operators to extend their internal audit intervals up to 36 months. That's the max you can go between audits. So let's take a look at what the requirements or the conditions are. This first bullet essentially means, does the operator have the systems in place to manage the operation effectively? A well-prepared operations manual will go a long way in helping to demonstrate that this is in fact the case. So in other words, if your operations manual, again, describes well what you do, how you do it, and has however much information you need to do that, to describe that well, that will then show that you are able to manage safety-related risks. If you want to extend your audit beyond 12 months, you will need to complete a risk assessment and send it to your POI. Note that the requirement is for the operator to carry out the risk assessment and submit it to TC, to your POI. There's no requirement for TC approval. You don't have to wait for a letter saying you're good to go. You simply send it and they file it, or they might get back to you. This goes back to the expectation we discussed right at the beginning. The operator is expected to do things right until proven otherwise. So the fact that you have this ability to just self-extend and just submit, you don't need approval, that relays, informs you that there is a certain level of confidence or expectation, however you want to word it, that operators will be complying with the regulatory requirement. Now, there are certain specific situations where an operator may not use the provision for extended audit intervals. So, for example, if you have a major accident or major changes in operations, then you cannot use that provision even if you've got yourself set up to do that. So as already mentioned, during the SMS info session we held on May 2nd, we discussed the annual SMS review, and we noted that the annual SMS review cannot be extended. If you keep good records of your annual SMS review, and they are readily available along with your audit records, then it will no doubt help convince Transport Canada that your operation is compliant and that they've got nothing to worry about. You can, as our Bob already mentioned, the past session will be posted. You can look for more information there. So what is the difference between an internal audit and a TC audit? In theory, it's only the auditor and the consequences. The concept is that you look in as much detail as necessary and as required and make sure that the audit is done properly. In practice, there are some differences though. And the internal audit is mandated audit intervals. Like we said, you have initial 12 months, no more than 36 months. TC, on the other hand, is entirely discretionary. I've seen operators that have gone for a decade or longer without having received an audit from TC. So that's the single major difference, really, if you think about it. Internal audit operators also, of course, have the option to audit additional items added to their checklist if they feel it's important. You can always do more. You can never do less. And of course, there could be other differences. And as we will see in a little bit, the SMS, including the audits, is the area TC pays the most attention to. So whenever you're doing audits, make sure you document things as appropriate, so that when TC comes, part of their SMS thing is they will be looking at, have you done your audits? How well were they done? Are you using checklists? What are you doing with findings and so forth? Now I want to take a little bit of time and look at the difference between quality control and quality assurance. Those are not the same thing. Quality control should be part of the day-to-day processes. The work should be done in such a way that there are no errors, mistakes, or omissions. A good example that all the pilots are familiar with for sure, and even the AMEs and other operations people, are checklists and do lists. These lists make it possible to perform a task near perfectly every time. Your takeoffs always equal your landings, and your landings equal your takeoffs. And if you never miss something, it is probably because you're using a checklist or a do list or something that helps you go step by step through something. That is, in essence, at its most simply, that's quality control, where you make sure that nothing is done incorrectly in the first place. Quality assurance audits, on the other hand, come in after the fact, and they confirm that there are no issues or flaws in the process. After completion of an audit, you should be able to predict what will happen in the future. That's how audits work, quality assurance work. The prediction is made on the basis of past performance. If something worked yesterday, and you have the records to prove it, and nothing else has changed, then you should be able to do the same thing tomorrow and expect similar outcomes. Every now and then, a company I do an audit for, I come back next year and we'll find something else and say, well, why didn't you find it last time? Well, last time we didn't look at it in enough detail or whatever. And so we need to use different approaches there. Now we're going to look at auditor versus management responsibility. The two are not the same, the two are different. And let's first look at the auditor responsibility. They plan and conduct the audit, of course. They use whatever tools they have in their toolbox. They record the findings. And the recording of findings of compliance is something that gets easily missed. And in my experience, it takes much more time to write that part than the records of non-compliance. In a nutshell, an auditor has to provide enough information in the report that someone else can come along and check up on the auditor itself to make sure are they doing their job properly. And if you don't know what they looked at and what they found, what the auditor found to be compliant, you can't check up on. Auditors are responsible for providing reasonable assurance, not complete, not 100%, because one of the items, the tools in an auditor's toolbox is sampling, and so it can never be 100%. And they're looking for material non-conformance, not every little thing. That's not the purpose of a quality assurance audit. And then they express an opinion, and it's just that, an opinion. Now, it should be an informed and educated judgment or opinion, and that is based on the objective evidence gathered during the process. Every effort should be made to ensure that assessments of conformance or non-conformance are free of all personal bias and that they are supported by evidence that is objectively verifiable, and an informed third party can come to the same conclusions if they're using the same guidelines and assumptions. That is the responsibility of an auditor. Now, management, as we already set out at the beginning, is responsible for regulatory compliance to accomplish compliance. These are some of the things that management must do. Conduct operations in accordance with the CARs, of course. They develop policies and procedures. They develop the internal quality control process. Again, emphasis on control, not assurance. They evaluate and accept or reject non-conformances. They look at the causes, whatever caused and contributing factors the non-conformance. They are required to develop appropriate mitigation or to prevent recurrences if there were non-conformances. So now we are going to look at some audit trends and what we've observed. So this is based on my experience as well as the information from the CBAA Audit Experience Survey that was sent out. As was already mentioned, I believe we have about another week, I think till October 14, if I'm not mistaken. So for those of you who haven't completed that, feel free to go ahead and do that. So these are the focus areas. What we're talking about focus areas, we're talking about which areas are the most common that TC looks at when they schedule an audit or an inspection with your enterprise, with your operation. And these are the numbers. 80% of the time, they will look at the SMS. So that includes your QA, your quality assurance audits. 2/3 of the time, they're looking at the maintenance control system. And about 1/3 of the time, they look at either crew training and qualifications, operational control, and passenger and cabin safety. And these are all the major areas that an operation encompasses. The outcomes or the findings that get issued by Transport Canada. This is what the data shows us so far. 0 formal non-conformances for operators who are using reputable third-party vendors and service providers. So here what we're talking about is tools, service providers that are available within the industry. They are typically retained by operators who are either too busy to do it all themselves, don't have the skill set in-house or whatever reason, and more often than not, it's the smaller ones because they simply don't have all the resources. But those who make good use of reputable third-party vendors, of all the data that we've collected, there are 0 non-conformances. That is a very good outcome. Of that same group, so the ones that are using reputable third-party vendors, they had 2 formal observations from Transport Canada. A formal observation from Transport Canada does not mandate that you have to respond or develop a corrective action plan. It's probably in your best interest if you let TC know that you did something, but this is also very, very good. On the other hand, for operators who use only some or no reputable third-party vendors, there were 9 non-conformances in the data that we've seen. enforcement action was being considered for one. Now, very importantly, some operators who are not using third-party vendors are also doing just fine. What we're saying here is that wherever you get your information from, whether that is within your company, operators who know what they're doing, who have the training, who have the tools, they do fine on Transport Canada audits. Take a quick look at the proposed amendments coming up. Earlier this year, TC itself was audited by ICAO, and this NPA was issued in response to that. They are targeting implementation of these things, these items that they're amending in spring 2025. I thought I had seen a pushback already on the deadline. Maybe not. It's not uncommon that these things get pushed back. And in the interest of time, we'll be reading through them fairly quickly, and then we can circle back in the question and response time. So changes affecting foreign civil aviation medical examiners. This does not affect your domestic CAMI, Civil Aviation Medical Examiner. Apparently, this is currently not mandated in the cars. I don't think I've ever seen an operator who does not carry it, but that looks like they're going to put that in the cars being proposed. Also, the AFM. Currently, there is no aviation regulation that mandates your AFM to be current. It's interesting. And this requirement, the AOM, I don't think that'll affect most private operators because I don't know of a private operator who uses an AOM. This is an in-house generated manual on how to operate your aircraft. And all the private operators I know, they just use the AFM or other OEM provided flight manual, operating manual. And some requirements for readback. And then a new regulation is coming to clarifying that the PIC is the final authority. This is because currently the cars could be interpreted such that a PIC must follow an ATC instruction no matter what, even if there's a safety issue. And this regulation would help clarify that if safety of flight is being threatened, the PIC has the authority to deviate from an ATC instruction. For example, in response to a TCAS alert or something like that. Some miscellaneous changes affecting operators. This is Part 7 operators, so probably nothing of great importance to you guys.
So, Ed, maybe I'll jump in on one point.
Uh-huh.
Through the presentation, Ed very well explained about TC audits and what they look at and how they get there. But I have been asked in the past, is how come I have not been audited? And Ed kind of spoke to it because this sector of the industry is doing well. And if everything's going well, they don't tend to pay a lot of attention. And that's where the discretionary item comes in. At Transport, they have a formula, and it's not a perfect formula, but it is a formula that bases itself on what's going on in the industry, such as through CADORs or incidents or other information that they may have gathered either from the TSB or just by walking around and what they observe. And that's how the frequencies come up. So what will likely happen is that those that go to the top of the pile are the Part 7 operators. The larger you are, the more often you get seen because of the risk factors assigned to that with respect to passenger transportation and everything else. So I did want to mention that. I know it's not a big thing to add, but it does show why some people have not been seen in a decade. So that brings us back to the other points that Ed was saying, is running a good internal system in place so that if they do show up, even if it's after 10 years, they can't say, well, you've been doing this wrong for a number of years. No, you have been doing things right because you're following the process that's set up. So I just wanted to mention that. And I think Ed explained very well the other aspects of going from the system, the process, or the reactionary. And typically, the reactionary audits or inspections typically throw the rest of the audit system in disarray. If you have an event, it consumes significant resources within Transport Canada. Therefore, their whole schedule kind of changes. So again, you may have been scheduled, for example, but because of something else, you get moved. Then they do their risk assessment annually, and then, oh, it doesn't pop up anymore. So just wanted to provide a bit of background on that. And on the point of the NPA, yes, it will be delayed likely. We have not seen a Canada Gazette Part 1 yet. We saw the NPA, which is basically what they're proposing. So they're probably debating with Justice right now to get the final language of the regulations. And so we'll likely see them either late this year or early next year. So it'll probably be a year beyond that. So anyway, just my 2 cents to add to the conversation.
Yeah, no, that's good added information there. Thank you, Bob.
Maybe Ed, I'll come on also, and maybe I posted this question in the chat, but it's ultimately for the attendees. Whether you want to just write it into the chat or whether you want to come off mic, but it's ultimately, have you recently completed an audit with TC? So I know that you're there, and maybe Ed, while folks contemplate that question or think of what they've got, I want to go back a little bit to that point you raised about, what good looks like. You talked about third-party tools. Obviously, the CBAA has some of these. Obviously, there are third-party tools available. Obviously, there are resources such as yourself and others to support them. But maybe thinking about the best practices, are there, when you think of the folks that are now either in role as flight department managers or persons responsible for the operations, what are some of the qualities and characteristics of folks that, regardless of whether they do have a third party, or they're doing it themselves, what are some of those qualities and characteristics that kind of lead folks to think that they're going to do the right thing there? Anything that stands out from you from some of the audits that you've undertaken?
Yeah, I think if I understand the question correctly, you're looking for the personality or the management structure, style, whatever that produces good outcomes in an audit. They are the same characteristics that usually lead to a well-run flight department on many different levels. And it is simply being on top of things, knowing your stuff, obviously, knowing the details, not knowing necessarily all the details, but knowing what matters. And on one of the slides I was referring to the reports, the ability to generate the key, let's call them key performance indicators overall, and whether that's regulatory performance or whatever else. In every regulation, in every task, in every process, you're looking for key outcomes. If you can understand what those key items are, and you have a firm grasp on where you are at, everything else typically falls in tow. It's just like a boat. If you point the bow in the right direction and set your sails accordingly, if those are right, then you're going to be in the ballpark, whether you pay close attention to or not. And so that's what we're looking for, and staying on top of things, like knowing what matters and what doesn't, and being able to present it easily and in easy to understand format. Every now and then you come across somebody who says, I'll make it as difficult as possible for TC. Well, good luck. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Peter. I see that Peter has written a question in, so thanks for taking the time to write it. And sometimes we're building up. So Ed, this is the question for you. You mentioned in the 12-month internal audit that can be self-extended without a TC's approval after doing that internal risk analysis. Is this documented anywhere, and does it apply to other operators besides 604? So the question's in the chat. I've read it, but perhaps if you want to look at it, it's there as well. And that's from Peter.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it here. Are you referring to, is this documented anywhere? Are you looking for the regulatory backing for that allows that, or a document for the risk assessment? I don't know if you can easily respond to that, go off mic, or type the answer in there. Maybe while you're doing that.
He's off mic now, so go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I was actually looking for the documentation to allow the self-extension of the internal audit.
The operators that I work with, we write that up ourselves, and we have a form that I've made up out of thin air because there is nothing else out there. and it basically says that something to the effect that we've evaluated the last several audits. Typically, you want to have at least one or two or three good audits under your belt where any findings are minor. You say that you would reference what you're using for resources or how you're ensuring. I keep it to a one-page document that we send to Transport Canada. That's on a standard extension. There is no, and I have not seen anywhere else that there is a template document. TC has, as far as I know, not set up anything for that. There is no form that you submit. That's at the discretion of the operator. Does that answer your question?
There's nothing
so if I can, so maybe if I can just add also, folks, that we have to remember that this is also based on SMS and the whole framework around that. That 702 and 703 does not have SMS yet formally. There might be some operators out there that do it voluntarily, but again, it's a voluntary thing. And a lot of those might be 604 operators that happen to have a 703, 704 certificate on top of it. But the regulation structure is different. So I think before proceeding anywhere with that, well, obviously, Ed has a process that he's developed for his clients that has worked. But I think to look at anything else, we would want to have a conversation offline and look deeper into the regulations and see how transport would respond, even where there's a voluntary system in place. Because, again, the structure is different between 604 and the Part 7. So I just want to put that in there.
That makes a lot of sense. Yep. Now I get it.
Yeah, no, as far as I know, 604 is so far the only area where you can self-extend your audit intervals in this area. It's, in my view, it's a huge vote of confidence by the regulator to allow private operators to do that. And so the onus is on us not to take advantage of it and use it as intended.
I'd also like maybe just to go back to Anthony's point about, you know, what is good. And I know that if I could slip on my Transport Canada hat back on for 2 seconds, informally anyway, is that one of the things that was always looked at transport side, Ed in the presentation speaks to major management changes or major company changes. One of the things that was always looked at is management position stability. So if you had a forever rotating chief pilot position happening, you went up in the risk because there was no stability. So that obviously having a company that's nice and stable was always viewed very positively. And the other thing, well, I might not seem it, is that relationship with the POI. Sometimes it's a bit rough because especially now with a lot of new people, and so there's sometimes a lack of experience on the transport side, but that good relationship and that person always knowing what's going on, even though it's not being asked for, at least keeping abreast. You see them in the hallway, say, things are going well, or going well. Those are good things from the regulator's perspective that gives them confidence. So I just want to give those 2 cents also.
I see there's another question. Is there a current TCCA audit checklist that they reference for these audits that we can access? TP 13750, I don't recognize the number. I'm guessing that is for like an audit checklist. As far as I know, from everything I know, and when 604 first came into existence, one inspector that I asked, he flat out says, no, we're not going to develop anything. There are no Transport Canada developed checklists similar to the ones that you may have seen in the past from Transport Canada for private operators, or I know Part 7 operators. There are checklists that TC uses that are available, but there is nothing current that is equivalent for 604 that I am aware of. If somebody knows, please do let me know.
I just had a quick look at the TP. That was essentially an internal document for TC for its own building of inspections and all of that. I don't think while it's still there, I don't think it's being necessarily followed, but it is a good guide for anyone who wants to know a lot of details. So I don't think it's a bad document, but as Ed has said, checklists tend to be fluid based on what they know or they want to look at. And as Ed said, 80% of the time they start with the SMS and they either dig or not from there.
The checklist that I use when I do audits, in-house develop, there's hardly an audit when I don't tweak something somewhere. Either a question is poorly worded, or a question has become obsolete, or a new issue has come up. Like, for example, the NPA items there, like, for example, radio license carried, AFM amendments. What I've added to my checklists now at this point, still as a best practice, because it's not a regulatory requirement, I update my checklists to start checking for those items. And the goal there is to make operators aware this is coming up, and to have the conversation so that they are, to Anthony's point, what is good practice? Well, you look ahead, you look at what's coming, and so you are prepared when TC comes. Oh, have you done this? All done, sir. Way ahead of you. That's and when TC gets the feeling that you're on top of things, they start losing interest real quick. Because by definition, the regulator, and I think Bob can probably vouch for that, is reactionary. Usually they come in after the fact, and they enjoy it when they have a good operator, but they don't typically get pushed onto the problem child.
Fantastic.
So are there...
Well, I was just going to say there's about 9 minutes left. So we'll still give a chance whether to come off mic. So if that's easier for you, you can do that. If you got to type the question in, you can do that while I'm speaking. Otherwise, we'll probably wrap it a little bit earlier. So I'll do that. I'll start us, and then I'll take one look before we conclude. So thanks to each of you for attending today. I think, I asked that question just kind of like trying to get ahead of it. So your attendance today means that you are concerned with, you are interested in this topic, and it's an important one as you lead your aviation operations. I think the intersection of the 604, 704 is important, the obligations that we have. And so your attendance today is just trying to unpack an area of interest that perhaps you had not a full knowledge of, or that you want to kind of explore or get firm on. So to that, I want to thank Ed for the time that you took, Bob for facilitating us and taking us through the conversation.